Good morning and welcome. We are so glad to have you with us today on this WellSteps webinar, Wellness ROI Fact and Fiction, presented by Dr. Stephen Aldana, who's the Chief Operating Officer of WellSteps. I'm delighted that you've joined us today. This is Dr. Troy Adams. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of WellSteps. You know, Dr. Aldana and myself, we take great pride and we feel a personal sense of responsibility to share what we've collectively learned in about 50 years combined in our academic and research experience, which is why we make such an effort to present what we think are really good content webinars for people in the wellness field and especially health insurance brokers. I will tell you that Dr. Aldana is in a hotel room in Florida where he's preparing to present some of this information to about a couple of hundred brokers at an event sponsored by Cigna. I have previously presented in a hotel room in Boise. I presented once in my home when there was a fire truck in front of my house with fully clad firefighters emerging from it with axes. But my all-time favorite is the time that Steve presented in a parked car in front of a hotel in San Diego in July while he was on family vacation with a borrowed internet signal. That's how seriously we take this responsibility. I'm delighted to know that this extends to writing as well. Steve is actively involved with an organization called HERO, the Health Enhancement Research Organization. Members of HERO include very well-known names that you would all recognize, including Kaiser Permanente, Staywell, many of the big corporations. They're members and they participate together to help advance the field of health and wellness. And Steve is one of the lead authors with HERO. He's also applied his writing skills to writing several books. Many of you recognize The Culprit and the Cure as a bestseller that's been out there for a while. Great book that makes an extraordinarily strong consumer case why lifestyle is the only solution to the problems that we're in. And he's got a new book coming out called The Culture Clash. It should be out within the next 30 days or so. You'll be able to get that from Wellcoa. And I know that he worked very hard to get that book out as well. And it is, I would, on a personal note, just like to tell you that I've really enjoyed having Steve as my business partner. He's one of the finest people I know. He's a family man, and he's one of the most generous people that I know. So it's with great delight and pleasure that I introduce to you the presenter for our webinar today, Wellness ROI Fact and Fiction. But before I toss to Steve, I will just say that for convenience sake, all phones have been muted. However, you can participate in this webinar by typing questions in the GoToWebinar control panel that you'll see on the right side of your screen. And with that, I will toss to Dr. Aldana.
Thanks, Troy. Well, once again, as usual, we're humbled that everybody has joined in with us. We have about 800 people who've signed up for this webinar, and it really comes down to this question we're going to discuss today. First off, why conduct this ROI analysis in the first place? And our discussion is going to talk about how to do it right, how to do it wrong, how to sort through fact and fiction on what these numbers really mean, how to leverage them to your best advantage, and then more importantly, what's the difference between companies with a positive ROI and a negative ROI, and what are they doing to get that return on investment that's positive? This question actually comes from a survey and interviews we do with brokers. We ask brokers on a wide scale, also some health promotion professionals, what are the questions, what are the barriers that you're facing right now? And one of the common ones we always get is, how do I know that the ROI is any good? Why should I do an ROI? How do I do an ROI? And how do I sort through the myth and the fiction and the truth? So before we start, I got to ask this very first question. Why are you going to do this analysis in the first place? What are you really hoping to accomplish with that? Because before you do the ROI analysis, I can estimate that you're going to have one of three outcomes. You're either going to find that there was no change in your healthcare costs, that they're better than they were in the past, meaning they've gone down, or that they've increased, they've gotten worse. So one of these three things is going to happen. And this ROI question has to do with healthcare costs, can be with absenteeism or any other cost-related issue at an employer. One of three things is going to be found. Either there's no change, cost is worse, or cost is better. Now, the big question is, what are you going to do under each of those three scenarios? Because before you undertake an ROI analysis, you should sit down and ask yourself, well, what if we find nothing? What will we do? What if we find that our costs have been greatly reduced? What would you do? Then the last one is, what if our healthcare costs our costs have gotten worse? Then what? I have seen this time and time again, where sometimes you don't, well, not sometimes, you never know how it's going to turn out until you've done a very good analysis. At which point in time people have gone, oh, well, gee, I didn't expect that. And it throws a big wrench in the works. And I'll talk about how groups handle that going forward. So why most people do the ROI analysis, to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of employers are doing it for job security. Specifically, wellness professionals want to make sure that their jobs and the money that they are spending for employee wellness programs is being well spent. Occasionally, a request will come down from a CEO or a president or a CFO looking for justification for this expense item, and they'll want an analysis completed. We'll talk a little bit more about that specific part of it and the level of confidence that's available for that data. But I've suggested in the past that few companies know what their ROI is for their advertising costs. Very few companies know what their ROI is for marketing or for their benefits or HR department, or what the ROI is on their new enterprise-wide email system. They don't ask those questions. They do ask those questions of wellness programs. And for reasons that have come clear as I've gotten older, we're kind of the red-headed stepchild in all of this, and people look at wellness programs with a skeptical eye, and they want evidence. They're not so sure about this purchase in the first place, and because of that, they want to add a critical level of analysis, and they want to do an ROI. So if you take an employer group like this one, we've got a bunch of employees, and they're participating in a wellness effort. Most programs, the really, really good ones, will capture everybody. But most programs will capture only part of the employer workforce. Not everybody is going to participate. So I'm just going to show you one quick scenario. This is a company, XYZ company, and 60% of their employees, as represented in this graph, have participated in their wellness program. And here is their healthcare cost trend for a 5-year period before their wellness program began. So from 2000 to 2005, their wellness programs, their healthcare costs keep going up. They introduce a wellness program right about there, and then they track healthcare claims going forward, and there's the results. Now, you just need to know that I actually fabricated this data from a couple of data sets that I've used on some other studies that I've done. So here we have the results of their claims over the 4-year period that they've been doing wellness. Now, you can ask yourself this one question. Did the wellness program cause that change in cost? I mean, after all, a return on investment says we've expended a certain amount of money and we've anticipated a certain return on our investment. If you look at the numbers, you know the numbers of the money going in. How much does your staff, salary, vendor, what's the cost of your wellness program? That's the cost side of this. That's the denominator. What is the actual expenses saved? And that's on the right side of this graph if we subtract out, you know, what a normal cost would be for healthcare. So here we have a trend line. CEO is going to look at this, or CFO is going to look at this. They're going to have to make a decision. Did the wellness program work? Now, in this really simplistic view of what I'm showing you, it looks like, obviously, something happened pretty significant right around 2004, which just happens to be the same time when you started the wellness program. So from this analysis, things look pretty good. So now my question, how confident are you that this change in healthcare costs was due to your wellness program? How confident are you in this conclusion? If you're going to flip a coin, is this random? Realistically, what caused the change? So I'm going to talk about the fact portion of the ROI analysis. And I know this is a little bit high level, but it gets to a core question. Did your program work? I mean, that's all we're trying to do. How confident are you that the money you are spending for wellness programs was well spent and that you have evidence that you have a good ROI. I mean, it's just about finding truth. This is all this is. So the very first idea is, what caused the change? Based on the graph that I shared with you, most people would say, well, it looks like the wellness program caused the change. And for many senior leaders, and for many brokers, and for many insurance carriers, or whoever's going to look at that data, it's very possible that they'll be glad and they'll move on their way and they won't ask any questions. That's one level of evidence. I'm here to say that that level of evidence is really, really, really weak, because there are other things, many other things, that can explain that change other than your wellness program. And here's where we get to the fiction part of ROI Fact and Fiction. There's this business of outliers. Outliers are the extremely high-cost cases that every employer has. If you haven't had one, wait a while, you'll get one. It might take a little bit, but you'll have one. And the way to explain this that I have found the best way is to think about your days in high school or college, primarily college, and you had somebody in that class who was ruining the curve because they were just killing all the tests, A+, A+. They were just getting super high scores on every assignment and every test, so that when the grades came out, you had a person that got solid A's all the way across, way above everybody else. That does two things. One, it makes it harder for other people to get A's, but two, the average grade in the class, the average goes way up because this really, really smart person in there ruined the curve. Well, if you look at your claims dollars and how your dollars are spent, this is a typical distribution of your claims. About 20 to 25%, if you look at the very bottom of this graph, had no claims. I had no medical claim expenses for a year. A large portion of your population will spend zero. About 40% of your population will spend less than $500, and you can see as the graph goes up, there's always going to be 1 or 2% who spend over $100,000 in a given year. That's the curve breaker. It's that really high cost case. Now this could easily, in this day and age, be a $1 million case. So if 60% of your employees get either zero or less than $500 a year in claims, and you have one person who has a high cost claim, then the total cost for medical care goes way up, and that impact of that one single claimant dominates the entire data set. So it's this top piece that we call. Some people have called this the Pareto, P-A-R-E-T-O, Pareto group, but it's the high cost group. Every company has some form of stop loss to prevent against those catastrophic cases, but they're there. And when they do and don't occur, it has a huge impact on your medical care expenses. So here's our chart again. In this particular case, the years after the wellness program began have outliers. There were several high-cost cases in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008 in this example. Let's just say by random luck, you don't have as many high-cost cases for a few years. That chart would change and look like that. So here's a case where outliers in the data set make it look like this. If that's the case, how effective was your wellness program? Doesn't look like we bent the curve at all. But if you take the outliers out, or if you don't have any high-cost cases, it's very easy for the data set to look just like that. So in reality, did the savings in your healthcare costs occur because of your wellness program? If that's the case and you have outliers that didn't show up in those 3 or 4 or 5 year periods, then the answer is you don't know. Most likely, the reduction in cost was due to the fact that you avoided some high-cost cases. You got lucky. Your wellness program looks good because your company got lucky. That's really it. It could be random, just random noise that can cause this. So that's one example of how an ROI can be dramatically impacted by other things except your wellness program. Now, I'm not discounting that wellness programs work, and I'm going to show that data to you. I am saying it's really hard to sort through all of the noise, all of the clutter, to get to the core of what's really happening at your organization. So here's another one. Let's say you made a plan design change. you changed your deductible, you changed your copay, your premium, so you went to a high deductible plan. All of those will impact how much money your company is spending on healthcare dollars. If you started a wellness program and that same year you raised your deductible for your employees, or you raised your copays, or you dramatically moved over to a high deductible plan, you're going to be spending less on healthcare because you've pushed a greater portion of the cost to employees, and they will be much less hesitant to use their plan since there's going to be more out of pocket. How important is this? Well, this is a big deal. These high deductible plans are coming, and they're still coming. I know there's some pushback from some groups, but I'm one example who has one. Most of our employees at WellSteps have them. This is where the future is heading right now. As of 2010, 15% of the small, 21% of the medium, and 34% of large employers have high deductible plans in place. General rule of thumb, you can knock about 17% off your expense in year one. So that's an average across a variety of things. So we started a wellness program, Dr. Aldana. You would be proud of us. It's been 3 or 4 years now. It so happened that at that same time we moved over to a high deductible plan. I personally think that is a fabulous 1-2 punch. I think it is the best way to approach this, because since you're shifting a larger burden of the cost to the employee, and you want to make sure they do all the preventative services that you possibly can, it is the perfect time to couple this with a wellness program, because preventative services become more prominent when we do high deductible plans. And we want to help employees save their own money. We want to help them not expend so much. We want them to be healthier. Let's do wellness to help you reduce this cost. So I see it all the time. It's a great way to go. Once you do that, however, and you do an ROI analysis, it becomes impossible to tell where the savings come from. Did the savings come from the fact that your wellness program is changing behavior, or did it come from because the fact you moved over to a high deductible plan? Therein lies the hard part. Therein lies the friction about the fiction about determining what the real cause was. There are other reasons why your healthcare costs can go down besides wellness. Maybe your employee demographics changed. If you have a younger workforce, a more predominantly male workforce, if you move from an older workforce like this picture to a younger workforce like this picture, you're going to have a dramatic decline in cost, just because the cost is associated with age. The older we get, the more we spend. Likewise, if you move from a predominantly female population to a more predominantly male employee population, your costs are also going to go down, especially in middle-aged females because they're not having children. So that's not something companies do intentionally, but it does happen. So if you're looking at your claims experience and you're seeing a nice reduction in claims, it's entirely possible that the entire reduction could be due to you having a changed workforce, nothing that your wellness program did. So I can continue to talk about, these are called threats or alternate hypotheses, reasons other than wellness as to why your claims may be lower. There's others. There's this thing called historical effects. Historical effects are stuff that happens unbeknownst to you or out of your control that will impact your cost. For example, the Affordable Care Act hasn't happened. It had a huge effect now, but well, to some degree it has. A lot of the carriers now are supposed to be providing preventative services and they're supposed to be paid for. Those preventative services are built into the cost. Premiums are going up. The Affordable Care Act is probably going to make a lot of costs going up. In fact, the New York Times this week has given an article that across the country double-digit claims increases in claims are pretty common. Claims increases of the 14, 15, 16, 17% range seem to be pretty normal going forward this year. Maybe you had layoffs. If you had layoffs, you have fewer employees, you have lower cost. Plan design changes is one we talked about earlier that you may not have a whole lot of input. Maybe you changed your third-party administrator for your claims processing, or maybe you changed your medical plan. You changed providers, carriers, insurance carriers. There's a lot of competition and everybody's going to knock a few percentage points off here and there. All of those impact the overall spend. All of those are thrown in together with wellness as one possible explanation. Fewer employees. Unless your data is divided by the total number of employees, then having fewer employees obviously lowers your healthcare spend, with or without a wellness program. Maybe you have fewer smokers. That change alone can be responsible for a big reduction in many of your costs. And then there's one more. And this one's a little bit hard to understand, but it's called regression to the mean. A simple way to think about this is, if your company for the last few years has had really, really low increases in healthcare costs, 5%, 9%, 2%, no change, 4%, 6%, first off, congratulations, you've done really well. Wait long enough, and I promise you those rates are going to go way up. Why? Because the average increases were probably way higher than that. Regression to the mean means really low scores migrate to the mean. Really high scores also migrate to the mean. If you remember your stat class, there's the bell curve. It looks like that. Really, really low claims for several years are not going to last because there's just a general overall pull for your claims increases to go to the average claim increases. And really high ones have a tendency to come down. Well, what does that mean? Back to our analysis of our graph. Let's say from 2000 to 3, your healthcare claims are going up like crazy. 14%, 21, 32, 18. Just by regression to the mean, that trend can slow. Nothing you have done, nothing your wellness program has done, it can slow pretty dramatically. I have a single family plan with Humana. It's a high deductible plan. We never use it. My claims have been going up in the 35 to 40% range every year for 6 years. I'm praying for some regression to the mean because I'm getting my butt kicked. We're okay, but the cost is ridiculously high. And it's not that I'm getting older, even though when I hit 50, they all think you're all going to die. But regression to the mean would help me because I'm getting hammered on my cost increases. I'm ready for some 4, 2, 1, 6% increases for a while. That's one explanation for changes in healthcare costs, in addition to your wellness program. So having said that, let's take a good look at this idea of confidence. A typical CFO, a typical CEO, is very busy with a lot of things at that organization. It is very unlikely that they have the research background or the research experience to take a hard look at this data and say, I wonder if those reductions in healthcare costs are really, really, really due to our wellness program, or are they due to something else? Now, I kind of like that approach for one reason. The CEO and the CFO, for the most part, don't care why the costs are lower. They're just happy that the costs are lower. So I don't care if it's the alignment of the planets or the sighting of a Bigfoot or the wellness program. I can breathe a sigh of relief and I can be happy because our claims are not nearly as bad as they have been in the past. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for one piece. You're spending money on a wellness program. Maybe, just maybe, that money is a complete waste of time because it's not impacting that trend at all. And unless you dig in just a little bit further, you have no idea knowing if it's having an impact or not. You can be happy that your claims are down, but wouldn't you be really happy if you could save the money of your wellness program because you've been able to demonstrate that it has had no impact? There's even greater savings. Or you're just content to plug along it, and I'm okay with that too, just for sake of employee morale or presenteeism or productivity, other issues like that. We'll keep the program along the way. The point is, you don't know if it's due to your wellness program or if it's due to the other possible confounders that have happened simultaneously. Now, this is one way to do this with one group of people. One group, have an employer, 50, 60, 70, 80% of their employees have participated in the wellness program. We're looking at the group as a whole. What about all the people that this employee here designated in black that didn't participate? if you're doing a trend analysis and you're hoping to demonstrate an impact of your wellness program, those people in the black images here, they didn't participate in your wellness program. In essence, any changes in your healthcare going forward are due to the people who participated, and only those. The ones that didn't participate are diluting your results. One solution to that problem is to split your group. Have an employer with all their employees and say, okay, we're going to make two groups. So we're going to have one group of program participants and another group of non-participants. Now, the reason why this is such a good approach is because all of those little factors that could influence this decision, historical effects, or changes in a high deductible plan, or changes in a copay, or regression to the mean, or fewer smokers, all of those things are equal between the two groups. The only difference, for the most part, the only main difference between these two groups of people, is that one group participated in your wellness program. Now we've isolated, to a degree, we've isolated the impact of the wellness program. I want to know, dang it, we spent $1.4 million the last 4 years on this program. I want to know if we're getting our money's worth. Well, great. There's a way to do that. And that's precisely what we did in 2010. We published an article in the Journal of Preventive Medicine at Salt Lake County. 3,400 employees. They're self-funded. It's a big group, and it makes it easy to do claims analyses. They've done really good biometric screening and behavior change campaigns, good participation, have a really good incentive program, and here is their data. The red line is the participants in the program, and that's their average cost per claim for a 5-year period after the program began. And here's the non-participants, and there's the trends. So you can see some interesting things here. This is a two-group design. We've got a good, really good ROI analysis. Program participants are having their cost increase. However, program non-participants, the blue line, their costs are going up even greater. Their average cost per claim is higher than it is for the participants. Well, now let's see if you've learned anything from the last information we've just talked about. I want the skeptics in the group to sound off. I want you to all ask the really tough questions. Say, okay, let's take a good look at this. Did the wellness program cause a difference in those trends? The first thing you should be doing is seeing that in 2004, the groups didn't start at the same place. In fact, the non-participants had a higher claim cost than the participants. So what's up with that? Well, here's what we do when we do this kind of study. We use very sophisticated statistical tools to control for confounders. What are those confounders? Well, you want to know the best predictor of healthcare costs going forward? The single best predictor of what a group's healthcare costs will be is past healthcare claims. Whatever healthcare claims you've had in the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that is the best predictor of what you're going to have going forward. So in this particular study, we've got the study. The wellness program started in 2004, right about here. We went back to almost 1999, and we took 5 years of pre-wellness program claims, and we used that to statistically control for any differences going forward. So we removed that piece. We also want to know about differences in BMI or gender or other health risks, because if you look at the data set, gee, maybe just the healthy, well people are the ones who are participating. Good. We checked for that, and we controlled for differences in BMI. In fact, what we found was the participants had higher blood cholesterol, higher blood pressure, and higher body fat. So we got the ones who needed the programs the most. They participated. They're the red line. If anything, they should have higher costs. So some people argue that, well, the wellness program is just subsidizing the well. In this particular case, we're subsidizing the ones who needed the help the most. And then there's always other unknown confounders. There could be some other possible difference between the two groups that might explain it. That was the analysis we did. It's very sophisticated, but what it does is it allows us to say with good confidence, this company spent $1.4 million for their program. Almost $1 million of that was incentives. Their healthcare cost trend deflected $5 million compared to those who were non-participants, 4.8. The return on investment, or the savings, was $3.3 million. For an ROI, for every dollar they spent, they saved 3.3. That's an ROI data set that shows fact, as close to we can get. Now, let me flip the coin over here, and let's quickly look at some fiction. Let's look at some ROI fiction. We had a broker contact us, showed us this magazine, had these amazing graphs. This was a wellness vendor that they wanted to work with, and here were these results, these great results that they were demonstrating. This is the program participants in yellow and the non-participants in black, the participants in yellow, and the black is the U.S. trend. U.S. trend for paid claims, way up for the U.S. For this particular group, it was down from 2009 to 2010. Now that's pretty impressive. National data goes up, my local data goes down. I like it. Inpatient hospital claims, the non-participants were going way up, the participants were going way down, almost double cost for hospital claims, outpatient claims going up more than double while the participants were almost flat. I'm looking at these charts, and I'm looking at these dramatic changes in emergency room claims. Here's the way this business works. How can you tell if what I have shown you is legitimate versus this data set? I mean, how can you really tell if the data is any good? How do you know if it's fact or fiction? Well, I can tell you this much. The group that published this data asked one of my colleagues to do the analysis like I previously mentioned. The analysis was completed, but the results ended up not showing anything remotely close to what's in these slides. But the data is already published in this online journal. It was published in Forbes. A lot of people look at it and say, wow, this wellness program, which is coaching, is really, really good. Look at these data. The data have never been verified. We attempted, and my colleague attempted to analyze the results, could find nothing. There was no impact on the program whatsoever. These results don't get published by peer-reviewed journals. They get published in online business journals that are not going to question any of the results. So we have now an example of fact, a really good analysis reviewed by peer-reviewed, Salt Lake County, and full-on unadulterated fiction, which is published in Forbes and comes out in an online journal and it's great marketing, don't get me wrong. So here's a little quiz. Let's see how well you've done. Here's some actual data from another company, and here are their results. Program participants are in red, non-participants are in green. We think this is a fabulous wellness program. All right, what's the first question you should be asking at this point? Based on what I said, now I'm not normally a pessimistic person, but I am really skeptical. And I just have found unadulterated garbage in a lot of places where I look. So how can you tell? How do you know this is any good? The first thing you should say, the very, very first thing is, has anybody reviewed the data? The best review would be, has it been published? Because that's where you take really independent scientists who know what they're doing and they look over their methods and they go, ah, this is pretty tight. That's why we have the peer review process. If it came out of the marketing department and it's some numbers that the CEO threw together late at night, it's extremely skeptical. Now, I would love to have a program that provides the results like that. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to paint the picture that wellness programs work really well all the time and all these things are miraculous and they change people's lives and they prove health and they save money hand over fist. It's just simply not true. I get a little angry because it gives my profession, the profession I devoted my life to, it gives us a bad name. It puts us in there with snake oil salesmen and everybody else. I'm interested in fact. I'm interested in good, solid data that does this. Now, there are at least 4 companies, 2 wellness vendors that have approached me and some of my colleagues to do a really good ROI analysis of their program. We have done those using those really sophisticated methods that I mentioned to you. Unfortunately, their results did not turn out very good. And in fact, I have a couple scenarios where program participants cost more the non-participants. So what happens then? I mean, what happens to that data? Well, first off, it rarely gets published. What happens is we put together a white paper, we go back to the person whoever wanted it done, we explain the results, explain our methodology, and this is what happens. It gets buried. We don't want this information out there. So they dig a big hole, they take the data set, they take the results, they take the PowerPoints and the white papers and all the analyses and statistical tests and the p-values and the t-test, and they bury it as if it never happened. Now, if they're wise, they would then go back and look at their program and say, what can we do to make this better? Because obviously it didn't work. Now, and that's why WellSteps publishes everything. Dang it, if it's not working, not only are we WellSteps employees wasting our time, but we're wasting employee resources and time. So to me, this whole peer review thing it's the litmus test. If it's working, it passes and it's publishable. If it doesn't, then we're starting to get into the marketing fiction arena, and it's a dangerous place to be. And nobody's any better for it. So I joke about burying the results, and nobody digs a hole in the ground and does it, but I will promise you that they never see the light of day. Because that data doesn't do this company any good. It doesn't bode well for their company. It would probably be a marketing disaster if the word got out. So you don't see it. I've seen it. I've done the analyses. I've written the papers and I've submitted them to these groups, and they come back and say, thank you very much, we'll take it from here, and you'll never hear another word from it. It's probably true that that happens in I know it happens in pharmaceuticals, it happens in every industry, but it happens in the wellness industry as well. I just hope that they'll go back to the drawing board and say, hey, we got to do something different to make this work. All right. A couple of observations that are accurate that you should know about. All of the ROI projections we have on wellness programs are based on large employers. The large employers provide us with enough statistical power, because they have a lot of people, that we can eliminate things like outliers, regression to the mean, historical effects, and we can get to the real answer. Did the wellness program cause this? So to your points, yes, the data comes from large employers because it has to, and we're never going to see an ROI analysis on small employers unless there's a whole bunch of them grouped together, because it's like sampling for a national survey. You got to sample a lot of people to get a small margin of error, and small employers don't have enough people to do it. All of the research up to this point in time that's been published on ROI for healthcare costs has been on self-insured groups. So they are in a position to gain the most if they're just talking about just healthcare costs. Now, if we expand out and go a little further and say, well, what about other cost-saving areas outside of healthcare costs? Now, by the way, the healthcare cost piece, I've shown this study a million times, 32 studies reviewed. The average ROI for healthcare costs for wellness programs is 3.5. You've seen that. We created the ROI calculator at WellSteps. You've seen it here at the WellSteps tools. We update it every time we get a new paper that comes out. You click on the tool, it's free. You can put in your healthcare costs, your annual increases, number of employees, and you can get the most accurate projection of what the impact of a good wellness program would be. A good wellness program. Not just a health risk appraisal or not an occasional visit with a coach. A good appraisal. Other groups have done this. One of my favorites that came out was a Citigroup study that came out in 1999, about 13 years ago. Very good study. I know Ron Getzel, the author. They showed an ROI savings of 4.5 to 4.7 for every dollar spent. That's a great result in a very, very good study. Interestingly, they hung all of their marbles on the healthcare cost piece. And within a year and a half, the Citibank Wellness Program ceased to exist. They closed it. They just stopped it, folded it all up. Even though we had a really good ROI, they weren't interested in continuing it for a variety of other reasons. So because of that, I encourage people to look beyond the healthcare cost ROI. Absenteeism actually has a higher ROI. 14 studies, they show for absenteeism savings a greater savings than for healthcare cost. For every dollar spent, they save almost 6. Why would we ignore this savings? It's there, and it's very real. If you look at absenteeism, the percentage of time people are paid but they're not worked, Here's why people are not at work. Here's why they're absent. This is from the 2010 CCH survey. Personal illness, family needs, personal needs, entitlement mentality, stress. This is the reasons why people are absent from work. So the question then becomes, which of these could realistically be impacted by a wellness program? And I've listed several: personal illness, family illness, entitlement mentality, and stress. Entitlement mentality, because one of the side effects of a great wellness program is really improved morale. That can affect those. So yeah, it does have an effect on that, and it is connected with health risks. This is data from Staywell. The days absent goes up with the number of health risks that a person has. Lower health risks, absenteeism comes down, and we've added the absenteeism calculator to the ROI calculator, taking all those same studies. Again, a great way to get a good review of what's going on. So, presenteeism, it's part of the ROI factor. It should be considered. It's a different analysis. If you have absenteeism data, it's much easier to do than claims. But there's another piece. Absenteeism is one piece of this equation that's part of the productivity equation, which includes presenteeism. In this particular case, presenteeism is unable to concentrate, lack of poor work, need to repeat a job, maybe you're working very slowly. There has been one study that tried to quantify this. The simple analysis that I can provide you is the cost of presenteeism at a work site is double your annual healthcare spend. So if you spent $1.7 million for healthcare last year at a small employer, your presenteeism loss is double that. It's the largest single expense. We just don't write a check for presenteeism. We don't write a check to it. We don't write premiums for it. It just kind of seeps out. Presenteeism at your work site is really water cooler talk, surfing the web, playing in my email, Facebook. Oh my gosh, Facebook's probably the biggest single presenteeism cause on the planet. Visitors in my office, not concentrating, sleeping, boredom, not staying on task. I don't have the right training or equipment. That's all presenteeism. Which of those could be impacted by wellness? Well, I can tell you right now, failure to concentrate, sleeping, staying on task, poor health, those might be impacted by your wellness program. The number of visitors who show up, or the water cooler, or boredom, the wellness program is going to do nothing for those. The impact of wellness on presenteeism is real. There are a few studies. We've also put those in the ROI calculator. We can actually bend the presenteeism cost trend about that much, but we can't make it go away because wellness has no impact on a large portion of the presenteeism causes. Again, there's also a presenteeism calculator you can use. It's the weakest of the three because the data backing it up is the most limited, but it's still there. All right? One last study. We published a great paper 2 months ago in November using some data from the HERO group we worked with and the Wellbeing Index. We were able to look at presenteeism and look at it by tobacco use, diet, and exercise. If you don't smoke, you're significantly less likely to have high presenteeism. If you eat healthy, you're 1/3 as likely to have high cost presenteeism. If you exercise, you're half as likely to have high presenteeism. Remember, high presenteeism is low productivity. I'm not working much. We looked at BMI. The heavier we get, the more likely we are to be a high presenteeism individual. When we look at other health risks, sore back, neck, asthma, all of them are associated with high presenteeism. So we've got good data to back it up. Lastly, what's it really take to get a positive ROI? What's it take to change employee-related expenses? Those companies that have good ROIs, what are they really doing to make this work? You have all of you who've known me and Troy, you have seen this. We talk about chronic disease, health risks, and behaviors. It's a linear process that occurs. The best programs in the world are focused on improving employee health behaviors because that's the linchpin. That's the catalyst that starts this process off is behavior. Now, more importantly, how do we change behavior? How do work sites change behavior? It's two things. It's reach and impact. And I can't say it enough, and I preach it every time I get. In fact, I'll be talking about it this afternoon with 200 brokers here in Florida with Cigna. Reach times impact. Reach is how many people in the organization do you touch. This is poor reach. this is high reach. We want to touch as many people as possible with something that really works, or a program, a comprehensive program that really works. In this particular case, education and awareness, motivation, skills and tools, policy and environment. We always joke, but that is the secret sauce to behavior change. That is the secret sauce to getting a positive ROI. So this is it. You find me a company that has a good ROI. I'll find you a company that has reach and impact. They're doing both. If their program's only touching a few of their employees through coaching or health risk appraisal or whatever it is, they're not going to have a positive ROI. If their impact is limited because they're not really changing behavior, it's unlikely that they're going to have a positive ROI. From our evidence and the reviews that we see, and I sit on the C. Everett Koop board where we're on the Health Project, we identify the best wellness programs in the country. Reach and impact are the linchpins to this whole process. Irrespective of how you want to quantify ROI, if you have both of those, things look good. So to summarize, these evaluations are really hard. The question really becomes, how sure do you want to be? Many things can explain changes in medical costs, and that level of confidence determines how far you dig into that. The results reviewed by others can eliminate fiction. Have somebody else look at other people's results, preferably peer review, because that's the strictest and the most reliable process that we have, and it eliminates the garbage that's out there. And then to have a good program, we're looking at reach and impact. So one last item. We've gone through a variety of our LinkedIn group, which is Wellness as a Business Strategy, has over 12,000 brokers and members. We've been through our LinkedIn group. We've been through our databases. We have surveyed thousands, tens of thousands of brokers and asked them, what are the big concerns and questions that you have, that you face when you have the wellness discussion at a work site? And the webinar we did about 3 months ago was Answers to Wellness Questions Every Broker Should Know. We had almost 700 brokers on that webinar. We've had multiple requests to do it again. We're going to update it, and February 28, 2013, Dr. Adams, Dr. Whitney Richards, and Kelly Mosier from WellSteps are going to address that issue again. What are the barriers that brokers face to having this discussion, and how can they be overcome? With that, Brian and Troy, I'm going to open up to you guys, and you guys can correct me on all of the fiction that I just spewed out.
That was a great presentation. You're getting a standing ovation from the webinar participant, Steve. Although one participant was quick to note that you in your story about your personal health care experience, you said your personal health care claims are going up and you're getting hammered, but what you really meant was that your personal health care premiums are going up. He noticed that and thought everybody might be confused, so we just thought we would point that out. I told him it was a slip of the tongue. Not a big deal. So there are some great questions that have come in over time, Steve. One repeated question was about group size, and there are actually 3 questions. So you can just give short answers to these if you want. Several people ask, what is a minimal sample size to be considered, quote, a large company in these ROI analyses?
You know, I was just referring to some other colleagues the other day about actually a medical student in Illinois who emailed me this week. He wants to do an ROI study with 25 people. It's not going to happen. It's impossible. Which got me digging. The smallest sample size I can ever recall seeing, I think, was between 500 and 800 people. And there was a study that came out, I believe it's about a year or two old, and I couldn't even put my finger on it, but I recall it having 500 to 800 employees. I remember it because I was struck by how small the group was. So the way you do that is you adjust the data. You normalize the claims data. And that's a statistical way of saying we smooth out the curve. And then you can use some other statistics to analyze that. But I've seen it done with 500 and 800. Maybe it could go a little lower if you have a really good analysis that could be done.
Okay, so in relation to that, somebody asked, how does group size factor into finding positive results? Just really quickly.
I think group size is irrelevant. In terms of finding results, wellness programs are effective at any group size. In fact, our experience is the smaller groups are more nimble and can provide better oversight, and we get greater participation in the smaller ones. So if you were to ask what's the effect on group size, I would say smaller groups actually respond better to a larger, mega corporation where you're never going to get, 20,000 people. So in that effect, the wellness effect, smaller is, mid-size actually works exceptionally well. In terms of ROI analysis, we've already hit that. The smaller we are, the harder it is to do.
So is it even worth doing an ROI analysis for a small group, say 50 to 250, or to medium, say 250 to 1,000 size groups?
Not only is it harder to do, but I would not recommend it. What I would do is I would get your trend data and ask your broker or ask your employer or whoever, your consultant, to find some data from some comparable employers. If we're in the utility industry and this is our trend, what about another utility industry in the area? Or what about our competition? And let the brokers or the actuaries go and find some claims experience for some other similar groups. That would be the best and easiest way for a small group to see what the impact might be.
Okay, so if it's difficult to do an ROI analysis for small businesses, how do we make the business case to get small employers to adopt wellness?
Well, that's why we have the absenteeism and the presenteeism calculator. That's why we have never spoken much about it, and there isn't as much data, but we start talking about something like morale and company loyalty. Those are big factors. They're really tough to quantify, but they're very tangible and very real. If an employer cares enough about their employees that they're going to do a program, a wellness program, that impacts morale. It impacts a lot of other factors besides healthcare cost trend. Even if I'm fully insured, I'm never going to see a big savings in my healthcare costs because I'm giving that premium to a carrier. I'm never going to see it again. But all the other benefits are there. For example, WellSteps has clients in Australia and in Brazil where they have socialized medicine. So technically, healthcare costs concerns are not an employer issue. They're not doing wellness to save healthcare costs. They're doing wellness for everything else but healthcare costs. And that same argument is true for smaller employers.
That's a great question. And on that, we've had a couple people who've asked about the presenteeism data. You mentioned in your presentation that presenteeism costs were twice that of healthcare costs. And people are wondering about they want to verify whether that's the case, and what was the evidence he used to make that suggestion?
There's one study that was done to do that. It was published about 9 years ago, and I do believe that it is referenced. One of our webinars in the past, Troy, has been on productivity.
Actually, there are a couple of other references too that it's been a while since we developed the presenteeism calculator. There are actually 5 references on the presenteeism calculator. If you go to the WellSteps website, click on the ROI tools and the ROI calculator, there's a tab there that says the science. And under the presenteeism explanation, there are 5 references there that discuss that, and it's pretty consistently 2 to 3 times healthcare costs.
Yeah, this is the calculator, and this is kind of how here's where the references are. References are on, I believe, the first page, but they can get them there. They're all listed there. I know that.
Yeah. So here's to kind of a couple of people have asked questions about the Salt Lake County study, and when you showed that slide, you were really showing it to help people critically question results that they see in the literature, and you did that on purpose because the baseline cost for participants and non-participants was different. And a couple people got hung up on that, and they wanted to know, well, if they were different, how were there any changes? And I think you explained that, but you might go over that again.
Well, this is the beauty of statistics. Statistical control allows us to do some pretty interesting things. Basically, when we look at this data set, we notice that they're not starting at the same point. And there's reasons why. But what we do is we adjust. Okay, we get it. This group is spending more than this group. We understand that. But what you didn't see is in this chart before 2004, There's 5 years of claims going on out here. And what we do is these numbers that you're looking at have been adjusted by those earlier years. So if the earlier years were really, really high, obviously these are going to be higher. If the earlier years were really low, these are going to be lower. Are there differences in gender between this group and that group? Are there differences in BMI between this group and this group? And what you do is these actual numbers are not the raw data. The raw data were different. They've been adjusted for differences in BMI between this group and this group, or differences in gender between this group. These are the adjusted means after adjustment for differences between the two groups. So what you're seeing here is the adjusted group. The unadjusted data looks very different. And that's how we eliminate those explanations. We control for them statistically. We remove their influence from the numbers statistically, and it purifies the data set. That's kind of how it happens. It's graduate school stats, and it's boring, and you don't want to go there. And it's very sophisticated, but it's very powerful.
There was a question, a very simple question from our friend Robin Van Vliet, who wanted to know how is participant defined, and I responded to her that likely that's study dependent, but did you have anything to add to that? How did we define participant?
Early in this research, early in the evolution of our profession, we used to define it as HRA participants, which is horrible for participation. In terms of other studies, they have to draw a line because some people participate in absolutely everything. Some people do 70%, 60, 50, and some people showed up once, and there's a bunch of people who do nothing. So they're very study specific. But the higher you set that mark, 90% participation, 100 versus 25, think of it as like a pill, and this is a dose response. Small participation, small dose. Really large participation, large dose. You have to adjust that, and you have to maintain enough people in each group to have some statistical reliability. So there's a little bit of give and take in there, and they're all study specific. But my point is you can slice that participation group any way you want to find what the effect might be. Obviously, the more they participate in a good program, the greater the effect will be.
Here's a kind of we don't have time for just a few more questions. Somebody says I can't get data for individual employees to separate and analyze like you've done unless we're self-insured, and we're not. So do I have any options?
You actually can get your data. Either you have a third-party administrator who has access, or you have a health carrier, an insurance carrier who has access. Technically, if you dig in deep to your data, to your contract with them, the data is available to you. It sometimes takes the lawyers getting together and a HIPAA requirement and a business associate agreement, but this is exactly how we do it. You can get the data. It can come from carriers in a variety of ways. It can come from third-party administrators if you're not self-insured, if you are self-insured. But yeah, you can. You have to ask for it. You have to dig for it. You have to get after them. They have it. If, however, the carrier changed and you have a new carrier like a year ago, anything before that, it's toast.
Okay. You mentioned that the effect of plan design changes on healthcare trend. There was a question. Couldn't you use total claims costs and numbers of provided health services to determine if the savings was related to improved health versus the change in plan design?
Number of types of health services provided. Most analyses will include that. We'll remove pharmaceutical, or we'll analyze it separately. We'll look at inpatient, outpatient. We can do some stuff. We've even dug in and done it by individual and specific ICD-9 codes. Cancer, heart disease, stroke-related, diabetes-related, and we've really sliced and diced and cut, and it's way beyond what most anybody's ever going to do. Total cost, I like to keep it in terms of a CFO. How much money have we spent? And I don't care if it's for pharma, I don't care if it's for inpatient, outpatient, pediatrics, wart removal, whatever it is, it costs us. As a company, it's an actual dollar expense. I try to use all of those because the ultimate result is to go back to the employer and demonstrate how this program has reduced that cost. So again, it's client specific, but in terms of the CFO, I put all of them in there. Even though not all of them are affected by the program, they're still costs.
Okay. We've got many other questions here, Steve. I don't know if you want to hang out and answer a few of these, or if we want to try to take these offline.
Yeah, why don't we end the webinar for everybody right now who wants to leave, and let's take another 5-10 minutes worth of questions and wrap it up at the end, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, we thank you all very much for your participation and attendance today. We're going to formally end the webinar. Again, Steve, I don't know if you want to show the slide where we talk about, you've got that, the next webinar. It's February 28th. We hope you join us for that. We will be here for just a few more minutes to answer a few lingering questions, but we'd like to thank you. All right, Steve, we've got just a couple of other questions here. Here's one from Kelly. She wants to know the most common question they get from employers is, we've conducted various wellness activities at our company. We can't get employees to participate beyond a flu shot. Typical response might be offer financial incentives. It's a very long question. Or assign.
I'm going to refer that question to our webinar on getting wellness program participation, maximizing engagement, I believe is what it was called, where we address all the myriad of ways to get everybody to participate.
Yeah, so the ultimate question is, what's the single best way employers can get employees to engage? And you're right, that question has been addressed and answered in a 60-minute webinar. It's at wellsteps.com. You just click on webinars, which is the lower right-hand portion of the screen, and there is a 60-minute recorded webinar that goes over the topic in detail along with slides. It's a wonderful question. All right, let's see. So a question, what do you do with, we had this experience when we worked with some Kaiser small business groups, Kaiser Permanente. What if about 1/4 of your employees are not on the employee-sponsored plan? How do you factor all that into any type of ROI analysis, or if you can you?
There's no claims data to be analyzed in terms of healthcare costs, but you do have, well, and you may or may not have disability or workers' comp on those people. But you do have presenteeism, absenteeism, turnover, morale, employee satisfaction. There's a variety of things that can be gathered from those individuals, even though they don't have the traditional benefits as everybody else. The bigger question is for employers to decide if they want to include those or how much of the program they want to make available to them. But you have everything except those items. Again, it's pretty much like a European or a South American or an Australian company. They don't care about those anyway, but they have other data. And part of our health risk appraisal that we use at WellSteps gets at presenteeism and absenteeism. So the data is already there. We've gathered it just by the fact that they're participating. We've captured that data. And by the way, self-reported absenteeism has been criticized as not being very accurate. We actually did a very, very good study where we compared company-recorded absenteeism with self-reported. Come to find out, self-reported absenteeism is actually very, very accurate, very good. So data is good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I remember that study. There's a question about the value of biometrics in all of this analysis. Could you just value in the place of biometrics in all of this?
When we look at this slide that I showed you earlier about reach time impact, we go to this one right here. Biometrics goes right here. It's an awareness and education tool. It's a very good awareness and education tool. I didn't know I had high blood pressure. Okay, now what? Well, unless you have proper motivation, skills, tools, and policy, that biometric data doesn't go very far, does not go very far to changing behaviors or doing an ROI. It's just the very first step. So I love it. We encourage all of our employer groups to do biometric screening. But then we follow it up with really, really good campaigns and programs to do something about it. Does that impact healthcare costs? Absolutely. And it has a direct impact. One question I get is, do we have any metrics that say if I lowered my blood pressure this much, or if I lowered my cholesterol this much, or if we improved physical activity from sedentary to this level, is there a commensurate dollar amount savings that we could anticipate? I got that question yesterday in an email. The answer is no. We do not have that level of data to be able to say. That would make it a lot easier to provide some data for people, but we just don't have it.
Okay, it looks like, Steve, we've run out of time and we've answered just about all the questions. So if you could go ahead and close this down and take us to our next webinar in February.